Hey, how's everyone doing? I am Pastor Chris Harris with Grains of Sand Ministries. And this week we are coming to you while we are on vacation here, my family and I, here in Pensacola, Florida. As I said last week, that we would not be meeting in person this week. The location where we do meet at between 9 and 10 a.m. on Sundays is 3711 Bells Lane. And for 30 minutes, I discuss and share some thoughts. And then for 30 more minutes in person, what we do is we do question and answer and dialogue. So without further ado, we're going to jump into where I said we were going to pick back up on from last week. So last week and what we've been going through talking about a series about what God is like, how God is like, and how many people perceive God and have come to perceive God. So as I promised, we are going to start into the very mechanics about just how God actually is. And I'm going to show you a perspective from the ancient Eastern world of what they have believed, what many have believed, and where many of us have adopted our perception about how we think God is. Now, I want to tell you a story that my mother told me, and that we talked about. And so when she was younger, the image and picture of how God was like that she was given was that God was this tyrant, this ruling tyrant, that at any moment that she would make a mistake, that God was ready to just swat her with a fly swatter and just knock her senseless and take her out, destroy her, and anything bad that happened was because of something that bad she did, and that she did not know that God was loving at all. Now, part of this comes from a story she was given by her parents. And there was a story that was in the Bible about a guy named Elisha. Now, before I get started with the story, let me ask you something. Have you ever said something and somebody else heard it and they did not take it the way you meant it? A friend of mine and I were having a conversation one evening, and in that conversation, we were discussing some things. Well, if you would come in on the tail end of that conversation, you might have had and drawn a very different perspective and conclusion about what you thought we were talking about. So in that like manner, many people trying to understand God, they are trying to understand God from a perspective of something that they've heard. But just like if someone's heard you say something and they took it so wrong and meant it so far out of context of what you actually meant it. And then when they actually talk with you to get your heart to understand the context of what you meant when you said what you said, then it changes. Let me give you another example. If I say I have a flat, here in America, you may think that I have a flat tire. But if you go to Canada and say that, people are automatically going to assume that you're talking about a house. Why? Because of the area and context where you're at. When you say flat there, it is referencing and talking about a house. If you say flat in other places, they'll think you're talking about you having a flat tire. So anyways, how people perceive and how we understand God matters, because it determines not only our interaction with God, but believe it or not, it also determines how you see your own identity. Because listen to me, whether you believe that there's a God or not, people have a core belief that they come from somewhere, and you're going to identify with something in some way. Be it you identify with a tree, a bird, the sun, the moon, maybe your favorite music star, or maybe your favorite author, or your favorite movie star, something. Or maybe it's somebody in your family. But you are going to identify somewhere as, this is where I draw my value, this is where I draw my worth from right here. Because I came from that. This is how valuable and how worth it I am. Well, let me just get into this. In the old world, let's see here. 1 Corinthians 3, chapter 16 says this: do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwell in you? Verse 17, if anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. Did you see what was said? It says that you are that temple. And another place, this here author in Corinthians was the author of the Apostle Paul. But in another place, the Apostle John talks about that you know that you are of God because you love your brother. And it says, how can you say that you know God but don't love one that is made in the image and similitude of God? And it was speaking to anybody. It wasn't speaking, the author was not speaking to a specific group of people then when that was said. The author was referencing this to anybody and any person created, is what this was talking about. So in John 1:12, it says that as many as received him, he gave them the right to become sons of God. What that means is Jesus gave people the right to bear the image of God and bear the name of God. Now, we need to go all the way back into Genesis to look at this, to see how people saw God. So let me just tell you, in the ancient Eastern world, which is where what we have as the Bible comes from, because of that, their thought patterns and how they thought and how they did things was totally different than our Western context and perspective that we tend to put on the Bible when we go and read it. So when we back up and we look at this from an ancient Eastern perspective of how they saw God, okay, first of all, they had something called temples, okay? These temples were what they called, another name for them, they called them ziggurats. And they built these big edifices of things, big buildings. They had long steps that went up to them, and they were always really high because for them, they saw a God as one that was really high up and far above from them and so much separated from them. Okay, I'm showing you how they saw this. Okay. And so because they saw it like this, the image of God in the ancient Eastern world was always also a statue of some sort. This is where this comes from when you look at Egyptian pyramids and different things that you see in that culture. Because in their culture, what they see as an image of God was the different hieroglyphics that you would see on the writings on their walls and different things like that, and statues that were built. I mean, you had different animals and different, half goat, half person, half horse, half person. I mean, there's so many different things in so many different cultures that they had. But bottom line was, it for them, this said, this is the image of God. Now, here where we segue over into a Jewish perspective. For them, they kind of borrowed that. But here's the thing. Image of God, when you read it in Genesis, has to do with one that was born and made with the same image and likeness of God and was animated. Wasn't a stale, staged statue that was made by someone else by our own hands and could not go anywhere. Okay, so having said that, let me just move forward a little bit and I'm going to come back to that. So let me just share this with you. Light is also synonymous with gospel. Gospel is good news. So when I say light, I'm also talking about the gospel or the good news, okay? And there's so much more to that. But watch this. Light or the gospel isn't revealed by preaching to someone and condemning them as a sinner. Did you know that in ancient Jewish perspective, a sinner was not one like we've again termed in our Western context of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A sinner in Jewish context was one that, watch this now, was one that was not born as a Jew or an Israelite. Okay. And actually, because of their laws, when a woman had a baby, that woman actually had to be separated outside of the camp for a ceremonial purification of 7 days because they considered it unclean. And anything they considered unclean, they equated, watch this, with sin. Sin is, again, I'm giving you from their perspective, okay? Because here's what we got to understand, is that when something is written, you have to understand that from the author's perspective and what it meant to them in order for you to draw a proper interpretation of what was actually being said. And it's more of a focus on, same thing I started with, what was the intent and meaning of the words that were said, more of than the literal words that were said. It's like if I say it's raining cats and dogs. Well, it's not literally raining cats and dogs. We would not take that literal, but it's a metaphor and a figure of speech. Okay, and we have several different slang metaphors and figures of speech that we'll say, okay, and we actually mean something else. Okay, all right, just want to put that out there. So watch this. So light, again, is also the gospel, is revealed not by showing people how separated and condemning them as you should be punished. That's what we think that's what condemnation is. But light is revealed when you reveal light. When you reveal and show people who the one true God is through Jesus. That is the gospel. And we're going to share that with you today. So let me start with how the ancient Eastern people, how they actually saw God. First of all, what you need to know is that anything good or bad was labeled on God that did it. God was seen as the one who controlled your fate or destiny and had control of things, had more control than what was within your grasp, okay? But it was bigger than that, okay? It was also seen, God was seen as one that created, that determined things that went on with how their crops grew and all of this. And I'm just sharing with you, this is how they saw. So 1 Kings 19, let me start there. Okay, 1 Kings 19:9. Now this has to do with Elijah. I'm going to just start reading in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 9. It says this. There he came to a cave and lodged in it, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great, watch this, strong wind tore the mountains. Now, a wind strong enough to tear up a whole mountain, that would probably get your attention, right? Okay, get my attention. And it broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. Watch this. But the Lord was not in that wind. So the writer's writing this on purpose. Why did the writer write, the Lord came by? Because and then he said, but the Lord was not in the wind. What? He just wrote, the Lord came by and tore the rocks with the strong wind. And then in the next sentence said that the Lord was not in the wind. What's going on here? Here's what's going on. The writer is showing you that their current perspective and understanding of God was that in the destructiveness, they expected God to be there. But in here, what the writer is finding is like, wait a minute, the Lord was not in that. Let me keep reading. And after the wind, an earthquake. Okay, so an earthquake strong enough to decimate large portions of land and such. Again, insurance companies have this, and insurance companies call it an act of God. That's what they call it. They call destructiveness acts of God. So even the perspective of insurance companies, where we've derived that in our Western context about God, that this is how God is. But watch this. It says after the earth, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. What? See, all of these destructive, powerful acts that, again, they had come to believe that this is God, and the writer is writing, the Lord came through. What the writer is drawing your perspective to show you that, listen, this is how I thought God was. But I'm finding out God was not in that. Watch this. And after the earthquake, a fire. Now, wait a minute. This here is the cornerstone of American gospel, is fire. What do I mean by that? Because in our Western context, we tend to term God with either destructive earthquake, a destructive hurricane, or you're going to burn in fire. But in that, you see, it says, but the Lord was not in the fire. Now, wait a minute. Now, in Malachi 4, it's 6, I believe it says, I am the Lord, I change not. Hebrews 13:8 says that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So by nature, God is not like schizophrenic with different personalities bouncing around left and right. I'm going to be this way one way and this way another time. No, what we're reading is what people's current understanding of God was at that time. And they were projecting that onto God, that saying, this is what God is like. Okay. Now watch this. Let me read verse 12. First Kings chapter 19. I'm in verse 12 now. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper, or a sound of a thin silence. Did you hear that? It was like a hush came up, and there was a thin silence. So after all of that, and when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? It was the Lord. So the Lord was not in all of that loud destructiveness, but in that thin, gentle silence. Interesting. Let me give you another one. Jonah, chapter 1. Maybe you've heard that story of Jonah in the well. Okay. I'm going to start in verse 4. So here we go. Let me start in verse 3. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. Now, what you need to understand is, before that, a couple of verses, the Lord had came to Jonah and said, hey, I want you to go over to the city and I want you to preach to it. And Jonah was like, no, I'm not going. I'm running. And so Jonah ran. Okay, paraphrasing the story a bit. Verse 4 here. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. Yes, the Bible's clear on this. Did you see that? Each person had something that they believed in, that they rooted their value and identity to, of where their value was drawn from. So watch this. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and had laid down and was fast asleep. Watch this. So the captain came to him and said, what do you mean, sleeper? Arise and call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish. Little side note that you should know is that thoughts are seeds of the Spirit. Thoughts are seed of a spirit as well. They let you know what is the root of that spirit and where it came from. Okay, just throw that out there. Okay, verse 7. And they said to one another, come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they were crying out to their gods because they were thinking, man, God is bringing evil on us. The gods are angry at us for something we've done. We've done something wrong. Well, maybe we need to get rid of all our stuff. They thought that'll make the gods happy. That didn't work. Well, let's see what else. And they said, all hands on deck. Everybody start crying out to your God. Find out who pissed whose God off to bring all this, because we all get ready to die and we need to know what we need to do. Then they said to him, verse 8, tell us. Verse 7. And they said to one another, come, let us cast lots that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. In other words, they were rolling dice, and they had a certain formula number or symbol that they had determined, again, in their culture. This is where superstitions come from, that if it falls on this, then it must be that person. Well, it fell on that. And so Jonah had some explaining to do, and they were like looking at him, all right, dude, what did you do to tick your God off to get all of us to where now our lives are in danger? What'd you do? The end result was that Jonah told them what happened, and they threw him overboard. And when they threw him over, they were like, listen, don't lay this to our charge. Now we see a similar story to this in another part in Mark chapter 4. Verse 35. On that day when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him and them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern of the ship, sleeping. What? This almost sounds like the same story. Okay, let me keep reading here. But he was in the stern asleep. It says on the cushion. He was sleeping good. Jesus was down in the stern of the ship sleeping on a cushion. He was sleeping on a pillow. Jesus was sleeping good. And they woke him and said to him, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? In other words, we know that you've been with us for a while, but you're going to have to start calling out somebody. Because I guarantee you, as Jews, they had a certain prescribed way and formula way that they cried out to God. And they were like, all right, at this point, we don't have no temple around us. Somebody need to call out their God. We need to call out to God and find out. They had done that. It wasn't working. And they were still in danger of losing the ship and their lives. Watch this. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. In other words, he said, be still. Like you say to your kids, be still, sit down and be still. And the wind was still, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear, saying to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and sea obey him? Now, they had never seen that. And as Jews, they had this story of Jonah in their oral tradition that they knew about. And they were like, wait a minute. The last time we heard this, somebody got tossed over the ship. This time, Jesus didn't call out to God like we did. Jesus just stood up and said to the wind and all of that God created, be still. And it did it. They were like, wait a minute. Who is this guy then? Because to them, only one that is God could do that. And they're like, there's no way this could happen. This should not have happened. How did this happen? Who is this guy really? Because he is a person like you and me. Who is this guy? Okay. So in John 14, John 14 8 says this. This is one of Jesus' disciples. This was at their Last Supper, time that him and his disciples were eating. And Philip, one of his disciples, said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. In other words, when they were talking about Father, they had come to understand and know that coming from Jesus, Father meant your place of origin, who I am. This is where I came from. Jesus declared, well, let me not get ahead of myself here. Because, believe it or not, let me find it here. John 10. Let me go there. I'm sorry. John 10. Verse 30. Jesus says, I and the Father are one. The Jews picked up, verse 31, stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me? The Jews answered him, it is not for a good work that we are going to stone you. So they weren't going to try to. Now, stoning, for those of you who may know, they had piles of rock in the Jewish community, and they weren't little pebbles. They were big rock stones that were big enough to where if you got hit in the head with one of these jokers, it was going to bust your head wide open. Blood was going to come out, and if they hit you with enough of them, they was going to kill you, which is what their intent was. For them, they were seeing that as we are getting rid of what is initially can bring a curse on us from the God above that comes in the destructive fire, earthquakes, and the wind. Wind is hurricanes, rain, all of that. That's what that's a reference to, okay? Just showing you something. They said, for work, no. They said, It is not for a good work that we're going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. In other words, you are saying that you are from the very creator, the one that we worship. You were saying that you were on the same class. And actually, in Psalms 82:6, it says, you are gods. Let me go back to 33 here. 34, Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said, you are gods? Now, when Jesus said this, Jesus was not saying that they were the alpha of creation, that they came from their own selves. Jesus was saying that the origin of their creation and where they come from is from God, who he, Jesus, was representing and saying that he was. Okay? So when Jesus would say, I and the Father are one, Jesus was saying, I and the one of creation, Yahweh Elohim, means the supreme one of authority and power. See, in the ancient Eastern world, okay, what you have to also understand is that a god was known by how they functioned, and they were known by their name. They were named because of their function. This is why you had in cultures the sun god, the rain god, the wind god, because they saw anytime they seen a great act of power, they would say that is the god of this, and they would name it. And that would forever be the god of the XYZ. And they would believe that we must do these things of acts of worship in order to appease these gods so that they don't bring destruction and harm on us. See the picture I'm drawing? This is everybody's picture. See, so it wasn't just us. They had this perspective of God long before we got here. We just, a lot of times, what we have continued to do is breathe life back into that thing, and people still, a lot of large, believe this is how God is. But watch this. Now we're going to go to John 14. John 14:8 says this. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Verse 9. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Now look at that. How Jesus was saying, how can you say, show us the Father? Jesus said to Philip, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Father is, again, place of origin. That's what this means. Father means place of origin, where you came from. Jesus was saying, if you've seen me, you have seen. This is how the God of all creation, of everything that you see, the birds, the trees, and everything, all these ways that, and not just the Jewish culture, but every other culture had in some way minor variations or similar variations, but ultimately how they saw God still ended up looking like the same. Destructive as hurricanes and rains and violent winds to destroy, earthquakes to destroy, and fire to destroy. Are you seeing a pattern? This is how people saw it in some way. Death is coming. That must be from God. God, listen, this is how we said it. Many times at funerals is what I've heard. Well, it was their number. God took them out. It was ready for God to take them. God was ready to take them on out of here. This is how we painted a picture of God. But yet Jesus said, if you've seen me, you have seen the God of all creation. Okay. Let me go back to my notes here. Hebrews 1 through 3, encourage you to read it. But paraphrase, it says this, that Jesus was the expressive image of God. In John 1:1, it says, in the beginning was the Word. Now, word in the Greek means logos, okay? It's where we get the word logic and reasoning from. What something means, how you understand it. So if I were to take and look at maybe like, let's say I like cars. So if I were to see a car and I was like, man, that is a bad car. Or I could say, man, that's a bad car. You see my expression change? You could probably figure which one, when I said, man, that's a bad car, I'm speaking in terms of, man, I like it. That car is sharp. It's got everything that I like about a car and more. This car is amazing. The second time I said it, it was like, wow, that's a lemon. We don't want nothing to do with that hoopty, that piece of garbage. We don't want nothing to do with that. This is what this is talking about. So, logos is the meaning and logic of God. And it says in the beginning was the meaning and logic of God, what God means. So Jesus was the expressive image. Jesus was the meaning of God. Jesus came and said, everything that you see in me, this is what God really meant. This is God. Jesus painted a whole new picture about to the Jews and to the world. This is how God is and how God always has been. Now, let me move a little bit further. I'm almost done. In Matthew chapter 3. Let me go there. Okay, baptism in the Jewish culture and in that world was a bit different than how we've looked at it. Most of the time when we say baptize or christen, we think, oh, you're going in the water, coming out. That's a nice little ceremony. Great, that's what they do. It was a bit different there for them. Baptism came with this idea and thought behind it, okay? Here it goes. If I take a cucumber and I take that cucumber and I put it in pickled brine solution, and I leave it in there for the amount of time that it needs to stay, it literally will take on a change, and it will become something different, to the point that when I take it out, then I now cannot even call it a cucumber anymore. I have to call it a pickle. Baptism wasn't simply going in the water and coming out. Baptism was about taking on another nature of something, transformed into something to where you are no longer this and now you are that. So if you look at the idea of what it takes to make a pickle, baptism, that was the thought, the intent and meaning behind baptism. It wasn't simply being dunked in the water, coming out and you're wet. We had a good time. Let's go home and celebrate. Let's go eat dinner because of the ceremony. No. Baptism was literally taking on another life and a transformation. Watch this. This is why it was important what name you were baptized in. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but the American Christian Church did not corner the market on baptism. It came long before we were even thought of. Okay, this was something that was practiced again in the ancient Eastern world. And in their understanding, where we, in your Bible, when you read it, where we get it from, is we get it from there. Problem is, we took our understanding of this thing and we crippled the original understanding. It's okay if you want to have your own understanding about something, but be honest about where it came from. Listen, it's like, okay, they've already made Apple iPhone, okay? If someone else, and they have a copyright on that, you know what a copyright is? A copyright, when they get a copyright, that means no one else can take a patent on that. Copyright on the patent. Other people may come out with different variations of it. This is why when you go on to an Android phone and an Apple phone, the systems on it, even though there's phones, the systems and how they run are going to look totally different, because one can't take the patent of another, because they both have their own patent and they can't share that. Okay? They can both be phones, but how they run has to look totally different, because Apple has one patent and Android has another patent. Okay? So what I mean by this, when it comes to understanding things about God, and then we talk about baptism, you can't just say, well, this is what baptism is. If somebody else already had the original patent on it, then that would be what Scripture uses as what's called, we just read that, blasphemy. In other words, you're speaking ill about the character of something, or you're saying this is that. It would be like taking an Android phone and sticking an Apple label on it and saying this is an Apple phone, and then trying to sell it like so. No, you get in trouble for copyright infringement, trying to infringe on the patent of it, or if Samsung tried to mimic and do exactly something that one does without a slight variation of something. They would come up with a charge on copyright. You can't do that. All right, almost done. 1 Corinthians in 1:12 and on talks about those who were baptized in different names. And it was different disciples they were talking about. And they were saying that, I came from this person. Well, let me just go there, because I don't want you to misunderstand me here. It says this. What I mean is that each one of you says, I follow Paul, or I follow Apollos, or I follow Cephas, or I follow Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? Okay. So what he was saying was that it's not about any of us guys that are speaking for Christ that you're to say you're from us. No, it's all from Christ. The Apostle Paul was drawing the attention back to Jesus. Now watch this. Luke chapter 3. I believe it's what it is. It's my last part here. Luke chapter 3, and I'm going to end here. Luke chapter 3, verse 21. Now when all the people were baptized, and when Jesus also had been baptized and was praying, the heavens were opened, and they saw this. The Holy Spirit descended on Jesus in bodily form like a dove. Now what just happened right there? We read descended, and we have video movies where you'll see a literal dove coming and landing on Jesus or landing on his head or something like that in the movies. Okay, and that is again us in our culture literalizing what was meant to be a metaphor. That's like, again, me saying raining cats and dogs and expecting there to be literal cats and dogs. No, it's a metaphor. Follow the metaphor, the intent of what was meant. Okay, so watch this. So when it says descended on him like a dove, it means that Jesus was baptized. Remember what baptized meant. We just explained that. In the nature like a dove. Dove in the ancient Eastern world, when someone offered you a dove or brought you the gift of a dove, that was them saying, I come in peace, I mean you no harm. Doves are symbols of positive energy, number one. They are symbols of peace. They're symbols of love, no war, and are in the top score. If you look it up, it's like 10 of them, I believe. It might be 8, but they're in the top 8 or 10 of gentle birds in the world. They're in that. And this is just by wild nature. They're gentle. And what they were saying was that this one right here that was baptized, remember what baptized meant? Cucumber to a pickle. This man took on the nature of the Creator, and we have seen that the Creator of all things, the nature of that Creator is that like at the core, a dove, gentle. Did you know you can be powerful and yet gentle? Let me prove that for a minute. When a doctor, this right here is a scar that I have. They had to do some things that did not feel good, but ultimately they had to be gentle so as not to affect my eyeball in the process. It was a gentle work, yet powerful act to put me back together to where I can still see. I have a little better than 20/20 vision, the whole 9 yards. Okay? Here's the point of that. You can be powerful, and there's gentle. Water is powerful, but it's gentle enough to where you drink it, it can refresh you. Powerful enough to destroy things, but it's the nature of it is something that taken in, it can refresh you. We use it for everything. You see how that works? It depends on, how that water is going at that time and what's going on with it. All right. But the bottom line is this. At the core of God, the core of God's nature starts with gentle like a dove. I come in peace. I mean you no harm. And this is the beginning of understanding the core of God's nature and how God always has been. When we read that in John 14 and Jesus is getting ready to die. Jesus knows this. And Jesus tells his disciples, listen, everything that you've seen from me, if you've seen me do it, this is how God always has been. And the nature of like a dove never changed in Jesus' ministry. Jesus never issued and initiated a powerful wind to destroy when the opportunity was there, rather than destroy and break the boat up like we've seen could happen with Jonah. Or Jonah get thrown over. Jesus told the wind to be still, be at peace, quit tearing up stuff. You have no right to do that. And that really shocked them. Jesus also didn't initiate a great earthquake to destroy everything. There was a great earthquake, but it was at the time when Jesus died. And the only thing it destroyed, this is interesting, the only thing it destroyed, it ripped the veil of the temple to the Jews in two. That was it. It was a localized thing. And no life was lost in it. What? Fire. Jesus didn't issue fire to come and consume anyone. No one. That actually happened. We read about that guy Elijah we read about in the beginning of my message here. He actually did that. He called fire out of heaven. But yet when there was a time and moment, Jesus was actually going from one place to the next. And there was a group of Samaritans, I believe it was. And Jesus' disciples said, do you want us to call fire out of heaven to consume them? Opportunity. Now, how do I know this? Because at the time of Jesus' arrest, one of Jesus' disciples went to go take off somebody's head with their sword, and they missed, and all they got was an ear. And Jesus told his disciple, put your sword away. If I want to, I can call down legions of angels, and they'll come down and level the place. Jesus said, no, we're not doing this. So when his disciples asked him, say, hey, do you want us to call fire to heaven? They obviously thought they could do it because they walked with Jesus. They'd seen Jesus do all these crazy things. And if you were a disciple of that one, you were authorized to be able to do that same thing. This is what a disciple was in the ancient Eastern world. The purpose of a disciple was to become like their master exactly. Yet when the opportunity came, watch this, the opportunity was there for Jesus to issue the order and say, bring fire and just consume them. Just like we've preached. You're going to burn with fire and brimstone. That's what gets happened in America as gospel. And yet, Jesus said, you don't know what spirit you're of. No. Jesus rebuked them and said they were wrong for even thinking that way. What? So in all three instances of how they understood God to be that we read and read in 1 Kings, and we've seen also in different examples that we gave today in today's message, we see that they had a very distorted view of God. And when Jesus revealed God, Jesus didn't consume anybody with fire. Jesus didn't drown anybody in water. And Jesus didn't bring a destructive earthquake to destroy a whole city. But Jesus was known. The Spirit of Almighty God, the one that created all things, bodily dwelt in Jesus, Colossians 2:9, in gentleness like a dove. Remember, dove is a symbol of peace. I mean you no harm. I only want peace and gentleness with you. Okay, that's all I have. And we'll continue and pick back up next week. And we'll begin to get into the different mechanics of this is how God is. Because right now, some people are thinking, well, how are we made accountable things? How are we made accountable for this? Do you mean that God just lets anything go? No. But what I'm saying is that how God deals with things. See, water can be used. I'll get into that next week about the different uses of water. I'll get into that. So that's all I have. We'll be back at Bells Lane, 3711 Bells Lane. Next week, we meet from 9 to 10. Again, we do 30 minutes of discussion and 30 minutes of Q&A and dialogue. This is Pastor Chris Harris with Grains of Sand Ministry. Have a great day. Remember, you are loved. Take care.